All right, so it just turned 10 o'clock for me, so I'm going to make sure and get us rolling here. Again, my name is Adam Schmid. This is the Bidders Conference for the Technical Assistance and Capacity Building Supports RFQ. Many of you might be familiar with this through King County's Veterans, Seniors, and Human Services Levy, or maybe you've worked with us in another capacity, but however you came here, welcome. We'll do a quick little presentation, and throughout it, I'll go into some of the details about the RFQ. I encourage you to ask questions throughout. You don't have to wait till the end or anything like that. But for starters, I just wanted to go through and do quick introductions. And as a reminder, I am recording this conference. So if you have any concerns with that, just let me know. My plan is to upload it to our Zoom Grants portal so that if you want to revisit it or if you want to share it with anybody on your team, you may do so as well. All right, thanks, John. Okay, so going to go through here just really briefly to start off the meeting. Just want to make sure audio is still coming through good. I appreciate that. To start off our meeting, I just want to have a native land acknowledgement. This is something we've started doing recently, or really since the levy's been in implementation. And it's pretty brief, but I think it's very effective. So I'd like to acknowledge that we are on the traditional land of the First People of Seattle, the Duwamish people and Coastal Salish people, past and present, and honor with gratitude the land itself and the Duwamish tribe. Again, this is something we started actually out in community meetings and found it to be really beneficial and useful way for us to just ground ourselves. If you'd like to visit the website there for more information, I think it's really helpful for a lot of meetings, even those that are remote. And again, if any of you are getting any audio issues, please let me know. I'll do my best to make sure and adjust. But to start off this bidders conference, I do want to know a little bit about who all's in the room today. It's always great to see who all is joining us. So we'll do a quick introduction. If you wouldn't mind saying your name and then the agency you're representing today, as well as your preferred pronouns, that'd be fantastic. So I'll start, and then I'll just call off the folks I see here on the list. So again, my name is Adam Schmid. I work with the Adult Services Division here at King County. My preferred pronouns are he, him, and his. And from there, let's see, I'll start with Gillian or Jillian, and if you wouldn't mind, you can also enter this in the chat if you don't feel comfortable saying it out loud. Oh, excellent. So Jillian, I don't know if you can hear me, but I see
yes, sorry.
There you go.
I had it on mute. I'm so sorry.
That's all right. It's very respectful of you. Thank you, Jillian. Or
Yeah,
Gillian.
no problem. It's Jillian. Yes.
Jillian.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for hosting this. I'm not really representing any agency at this time. I'm just curious about the process.
Excellent. Thank you, Jillian. Next I see is Lauren Sales.
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Oh, okay, good.
Sound wonderful.
I am with the Urban League, and like Jillian, I just wanted to know what this was about. So here I am.
Awesome. And do you have any preferred pronouns you care to share today?
Her.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate that. Okay, John, I see you're next. John Perkins. And John, you are currently on mute.
Hi,
there
can you hear
go.
me now?
Yeah, perfect.
So there's a trick on Zoom. If you press the space bar, it temporarily unmutes you. And when you don't press it anymore, you're back into muted. So I just learned that this week, and I'm spreading the word.
Thank you, John.
Yeah, I'm a consultant with Keep the Change Consulting, and it's basically one person shop, me. So I'm very interested in this. I've worked, specialized in thinking about the public good and nonprofit and government, schools and education, communities and sectors and businesses. So.
That's excellent, John. Thank you for sharing, and thanks for joining us today with the helpful hints. Next I see is Carrie Kazuki.
Hi there. Yeah, Carrie Kazuki from 501 Commons here in Seattle. And it's great to be here.
Thank you, Carrie. Roxanne Hood Lyons.
Hi, good morning. My name is Roxanne Hood-Lyons. I'm with RHL Consulting, and I use she, her, and hers. And I provide capacity building and technical assistance support for Best Starts for Kids and communities of opportunity. So I'm curious about the opportunity here. Thank you.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you for joining us today. And yeah, Best Starts for Kids is kind of another property tax levy that the county supports. So that's great to hear you've been supporting them too. Okay, the next guest I see here is S. Vigil or Vigil. I don't quite know how to pronounce that. So would you mind introducing yourself?
I tried the spacebar thing, it didn't work. On that one. Good tip though, if I can get it to work. So I'm Cherie Vigil. I am a program manager at Shoreline Veterans Center. We are part of Compass Housing Alliance, and my pronouns are she and her.
Cherie, thank you for joining us. Appreciate that. Always fun to learn the new tricks with the tech as long as they work as advertised. Let's see here. And we also have Toby Hill-Meyer. Toby, would you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, hi, my name's Toby. I'm with Gender Justice League, and I use she, her pronouns.
Thank you, Toby. Great to have you here. May I also, Trang too, would you mind introducing yourself, Trang?
Oh yeah, hi everyone. My name is Trang Tu. I'm an independent consultant based here in Seattle and focused on community development and nonprofit organizational development.
Excellent, thank you, Trang. It's great to have you here.
Thanks.
And Uma Rao, would you mind introducing yourself? Uma, you're currently on mute in case you're talking.
So sorry. My dog was yelling. It was a little bit distracting. I'm so sorry.
I appreciate that.
So I'm Uma. I use she and her pronouns, and I also am an independent consultant. My own shop is called Davy Consults. I do capacity building work with nonprofits, mostly based in communities of color.
Excellent. Welcome, and it's good to have you here. Excellent. And yeah, I appreciate all of those folks who are independent. I didn't mean to imply that you had to be with somebody, but if you are interested or if you feel like I don't have your email address, I encourage you to drop it in the chat at any time. We'll also be sharing my email in the presentation, so you could certainly have it at that point. Just as a reminder, I'm recording this conversation and I'll be uploading it back into the Zoom Grants portal. I also will make sure and attach the bidders conference itself so you can look over the materials there. And you can always contact me through that portal as well. So thank you all for doing that. There's a little bit of background. I'm typically in the community engagement style of work with our team. My formal title is community liaison. So it's always great to be able to hear a little bit and see those who are in the room today. So I appreciate that. Okay, so I'll get through this fairly quickly. For those of you who haven't been in a bidders conference before with King County, they are fairly cut and dry. I'm going to try not to say anything or do anything that's sort of totally out of left field. A lot of the information we're going to go over here is what you can find in the RFQ, but this space is really useful for Q&A in my experience. So I want you to stop me. I want you to raise your hand, unmute yourself, use the chat at any time if there's something I'm speaking to that either doesn't make sense or you feel is inconsistent with what the RFQ is stating. And it's my job to make sure and just respond to that and make sure and update the FAQ document with any questions you all have. So I'll go through these items on the agenda today. We'll talk a little bit about the levy. We'll talk a little bit about the background of this investment. Sounds like a lot of you might be really experienced in this field. And then we'll talk about the RFQ itself and then as well how to apply on Zoom grants. Excuse me, so hopefully not a lot of new information, but it is a great place to just sort of check and make sure that if I was writing something and I just didn't articulate it the right way, that we capture it here and I make sure and get it to you in the right information. So what is the VSHSL? These are 5 letters that staff will often blaze through. It's almost hard to tell that they're individual letters anymore, but they stand for the Veterans, Seniors, and Human Services Levy. I'm going to talk about this just for a little bit because I think it is really important to know the background on this funding as it really can be a really great guidepost whenever you're applying or whenever you're looking at any other applications, procurements, to see what are the values of the levy, and a lot of times we speak to those in our procurements. So the Veterans, Seniors, and Human Services Levy, you may or may not know, is actually an extension of the former Veterans and Human Services Levy, which started in 2005 and is still going today. It was passed in 2017, and it's a 6-year levy with funding available from 2018 through 2023. It focuses on those 3 priority populations on the right-hand side, with veterans, service members and their families, seniors, which we define as persons 55 and older, or older adults, you'll often hear us refer to them as, and their caregivers, as well as vulnerable populations, which is a really broad term and speaks to people's being able to experience vulnerability across their life rather than being assigned with a tag of being vulnerable throughout their life. I call it here in this bullet, the implementation plan was passed in 2018, and I reference this, we all reference this in our bidders conferences because they are the mile marker, the source of all of our procurements. So reading through that, or at least having a touchstone of it, is really relevant for any procurement funded by the levy. And this plan was passed and adopted by the council, but we informed it through continuous community engagement, and we try to continue and manage that today. All of the investments were broken down to these 5 results areas, and they really just speak to kind of pillars of life you can kind of think about whenever we heard community feedback that kind of typically fell into one of these 5 categories. And for TA, you know, the job of TA and CB, or technical assistance and capacity building, as I'll refer to it, is to really support all the providers doing the work in each of these service areas or results areas. And TACB as a body of work really falls most into system access and improvement, helping develop the levy and those providers under the levy is more than just singular lines of funding, but as a more cohesive team. And that really gets to the guiding principles of the levy. Again, I speak to this because I think it's helpful to know the background of it, but also I think you'll hear when we're looking through applicants, we are definitely interested to see if this is some sort of value that aligns well, and does the respondent sort of look for or understand how this could affect their work as they go through and provide TACB for their clients. So the key principles are fairly simple. So it's connection, and that means connection between programs. So understanding how we fund many programs as a large King County funder, and it's our job to help encourage connection in our contracting as well as in the things we fund and the ways we fund our providers, as well as belonging. And that really speaks to this levy is trying to support programs to encourage belonging with their clients and with their staff, and of course then across our programs. It's kind of challenging to do, but it really translates to us funding new programs, really community-based programs, and being unafraid of being challenged when we are not doing an adequate job of supporting them to make sure they're not just a funded entity that we sort of have individual lines of funding with, but they're rather seen as a larger part of the network that we're trying to support, and that we're getting all of our providers connected to one another so that they can share resources as well as grow and develop their own ability to be sustainable beyond levy funding. The other thing that we can speak to here is, in a lot of our procurements, we ask the question, what can only the levy do? A good example is the VA covers veterans and is much larger to many degrees. So the levy really focuses and a lot of its programs on trying to help support services that may get missed by state or larger agencies. And I think the same goes for TACB, technical assistance funding. We are really trying to support small organizations who maybe don't have the programmatic or organizational background to be able to sustain large changes or do many programs at once. So with this funding, we're hoping to kind of help bridge and get beyond that as well. So that's a good question we just sort of typically ask ourselves, what can only the levy do? So equity and social justice, I think, is something that is sort of a phrase we're starting to talk a little bit more about now in our country, particularly considering after the death of George Floyd and the recent riots and protests that have been happening. But it's actually been something that King County has been prioritizing for a while, and is embedded in the levy's implementation plan, as well as something that we're actually going to be reviewing and looking for in this RFQ specifically. So this here is just really our overarching goal. This is in the King County ESJ plan. And our guidepost is to ensure that all people, regardless of who they are and where they live, have the opportunity to thrive with full and equal access to opportunities, power, and resources. And you can see how this is very heavily tied to the work, the body of work that technical assistance and capacity building providers would do. It's more than just simply solving a problem for an organization, but really assuring that they are being given equitable access, equitable platforms to succeed, along with maybe larger nonprofits or human service providers. Okay, so now this portion team is going to get really thick and really dense. So I have a lot of text in the next slides, but I did that just to have it in the screen, but not necessarily to read off of entirely. So I'll go through the background and the next couple slides in brief. That does not mean you should not ask a question about it if it doesn't make sense, or if there's a piece you'd like some clarification on. So please stop me as needed. So this investment actually is sort of outside of the typical strategies that you'd see in the levy. And the levy itself actually dedicates 1% of its annual proceeds to support technical assistance and capacity building for small organizations. And we've defined that in the RFQ as well as in the implementation plan, where small organization typically means fewer than 20 FTE and a budget of $4 million or less in the prior fiscal year. This came from community feedback, so I like to call this out because it's the area I'm most passionate about. But we heard this from many providers that the levy was funding, as well as those sort of independent contractors or people that were coming up to us wanting to get started. Maybe they had never applied for King County funding before or ever been funded by the government. And a big concern was, I feel very connected to my community. I know what is needed for this piece, but I might not have the skills or abilities or resources to have a well-developed IT infrastructure, or I don't have access to the software that's going to be really useful, and it's going to slow me down, and I feel like I'm going to get passed over for funding from either King County or other providers. So what can we do to not take away just program funding, but have a dedicated resource just to support people in their development of a lot of things that affect their mission, affect their program? That's kind of the background for this particular investment. And that's why it's sort of outside of a strategy. It's just has its own carve out throughout the entire levy. So technical assistance and capacity building, or TACB as I'll refer to it, we define as a process through which individuals, programs, and organizations obtain support or resources and/or strengthen assets and capabilities to effectively and equitably provide human services. It's quite a mouthful. We're trying to make it to be a little more flexible so that we don't extremely lock down what it can and cannot be. And we generally like to respond to requests so that we can kind of figure out if it sort of matches what we had initially thought TACB should be, as well as maybe check our assumptions on what we thought it should be. And we'll see that reflected in the ways in which we'll support qualified applicants to this RFQ. But in general, we really want to we're trying to focus on just supporting organizations through resources and technical skills that they might not currently possess, that is commonly missing whenever you're just starting out, or if you're a new or young organization or a small organization. And then last, I'm just going to say here, the support is going to be more individualized and responsive. So we're not necessarily looking for a cookie cutter type support for all of our providers, but rather having a team and network of consultants that can support them and be responsive to their specific requests. So if they have an IT request, being reflexive and responsive and not simply giving them the exact same that every other provider has received. Okay, so this section really gets into the RFQ itself. So on the left-hand side, again, lots of text here. I know that's a PowerPoint no-no, but here we are. So on the left side, we see more of the types of areas of funding we'd like to focus on. It's important to note this is not all-inclusive, and it is also important to note that we are not going to mandate that you be providing all of these pieces. So I just want to call out, this is some of the like general areas that we've highlighted and have been highlighted to us from our providers. And just to be a couple responsive to a couple questions here I'm seeing in the chat. Lauren asked, is this more for the folks who provide tech assistance on Zoom grants? I'd say no. This is actually more for support for people who have already been funded by the levy and now they need to build themselves up. And yeah, in response to your other comment, Lauren, it's not necessarily for larger organizations. It's definitely more for that. We have a lot of new providers who are getting funded by the levy and by King County who maybe are really closely connected to their community, but don't have a great deal of experience providing the IT support or developing trainings for their volunteers, or are needing some help in developing their board or governance structures. So these are some areas we might be looking for you all. And I see Lizzie has a question. So Lizzie, go ahead and ask your question. Thanks for raising your hand. I like that.
If I can unmute myself,
I
can you hear
unmuted
me?
you for you. There you go.
Oh, great. Thank you.
You're so welcome.
So my question is, we're a fiscal sponsor, and we have some of our clients that are interested in the King County VSHL grants. We offer all these back office services, accounting systems, human resources systems. That's what we offer as a fiscal sponsor, really all of them.
Yeah.
And so I was wondering, is that something, is this TACB a proposal that we should be as a fiscal sponsor applying for, to support, to expand our support for our fiscal clients that are applying for these grants?
So let me just make sure I understand your question. So is it, sounds like you guys you have experience in these areas and you're kind of wanting to make sure you should be applying to this to support your currently sponsored partners, or is it you're looking to understand if you should be applying to support new potential partners? Is that right?
We want to support new potential partners. We offer our fiscal sponsorship services to fiscal clients that are engaged in this type of project, specifically vulnerable populations. And we offer, as a fiscal sponsor, they can they come under our umbrella when they're writing their grants. They use our tax ID numbers because we're a 501c3, and we offer these back office services that are listed in your overview. And my question is it applicable for us to apply for this grant to enhance our services? Because I mean, most of us are volunteers, but sometimes we need to pay some staff to run these services, these back office services, especially when it comes to accounting.
I think so. I think, and I think as we get into it, it might be helpful as well. But it sounds like if you are already providing these types of services and you would like to be available to be providing them for others that are funded by this levy, I think it's totally appropriate. I think the only situation we wouldn't be considering supporting that would be if you were using the funding from this RFQ to support partners that are not funded by the levy. That'd be the only situation where we wouldn't be supportive. But yeah, it sounds like you should totally, if it seems like it's something that you're interested in, that you should apply for. And again, like you'd be supporting people doing very similar types of things, but they would be just partners that are funded by the levy.
Yes.
And yeah, so it sounds like this is something that this is aligning with what you're interested in as well. I hope that answers your question. I'm trying to be responsive here.
Yes.
But let me know if I'm missing that.
We're actually interested in one of the like the Vets Engaged mini grant.
Yeah.
But that will be one of our projects in-house. But there are other clients that are interested in the other grants that are more specific for their projects, and they come to us as a fiscal sponsor because they're not a 501c3, and they want to write the grant, and then they don't really have all the staffing or the volunteers or the support systems in the back office to run their project efficiently.
Yes, yeah. So yeah, and that's definitely right. So it does sound like, yeah, I think being a fiscal sponsor would be a great example of what you could provide if funded through this RFQ. And you could be a fiscal sponsor for people who are currently funded and get support, but you wouldn't be able to be a fiscal sponsor for somebody who is considering applying. That would be the only catch there. And just to respond to some stuff Lauren is saying here as well in the chat. Thanks for using that, Lauren.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that, Lizzie.
I'm calling from Seattle, by the way.
Oh, nice.
My background looks like San Francisco, but our office is located downtown Seattle in the Columbia Center.
Yeah, exactly. And Lauren, you feel like you got the answer on that one too. Yes, if they are currently with the levy, they can be supported. If they are not currently with the levy, we have another area of funding, and that's called application assistance as well. So, okay, so good questions here. I appreciate them. Keep coming in. And I'm going to move on a little bit here. So, what are we really looking for out of this RFQ? So King County wants to build a cohort of consultants with a diversity of skills, resources, and experiences, as noted here on the left-hand side, in technical assistance and capacity building support. And let's see here. And Liz, I'm going to mute you just so you know. I'm putting you back on mute. Okay, so then the qualified applicants will provide culturally competent services, establish rapport, and build strong working relationships with the funded organizations. This kind of speaks to, I put this in here just because it speaks to, we're not necessarily looking for people who are not interested in getting to know the person requesting the support, but rather are available to provide more of a relationship. You know, a lot of these folks are small and have never been funded before. So I think they want to make sure that they at least are getting connected and they're having a relationship beyond that initial interaction. So definitely a good place for questions. And I just want to make sure that people are feeling like this feels good so far. Okay,
Adam, I have a question. This is John.
Yeah, go ahead, John.
How much of that rapport building time is billable? I mean, what, and because it's open-ended, you know, so
yeah.
So what's the thinking around, because it's a very, very necessary step, and part of the rapport may not even be face-to-face. It could just be, you know, I'm working with a new community. There's a lot of things I can understand through watching videos and doing online research and going to the library without even talking to them, that when I do meet with them, they get that I get it. You know, it's like you can see something go off in their eyes. It's like, whoa, you appreciate something. I'm happy you're showing up at this level of understanding, even though we haven't really begun to work.
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say that we haven't actually defined that yet. I think that'll be ironed out in a contracting process. I have a little bit more on what's billable here in the next couple slides, but it definitely is a challenge. And the way in which you all get connected to people we'll go over in this presentation as well. But as far as what all is billable, I would say let's pause on that because I don't want that to hang you up in your application. I think that's a good thing to bring up in the contracting process, because in the contracting process, we'll say here are some of the services listed out that we'll be allowed to be billable for, and then as well, I'll be interacting with you on a regular basis so that you can have a good feeling of what is to be expected and what I'm going to allow or what I'm not going to allow. I think there's certainly a reasonable amount of time to be able to say, like, is there any research needed or is there any warm-up costs associated with it before you actually talk to the organization? I think there's some room there we could discuss. But I think for the purposes of right now, we're just interested in making sure you apply or not apply. Let's just put a pin in that, and then let's negotiate about that whenever we're contracting. Because the way this will work is you'll apply. If you're selected, then we'll get into a contracting phase, and that's where I really expect you all to be asking me, hey, you know, I think this isn't captured in the contract. I'd really like to see that included, or I'd like to know at least how many hours I could do per consultant interaction. So it's kind of a non-answer. I apologize for that, but I hope that is at least somewhat illuminating. And Toby Hill, I see that you've asked a question here. Toby Hillmeyer reads, my organization provides technical assistance and capacity building to help service providers be able to effectively and equitably serve LGBTQ populations. Is that within what you're looking for? And Toby, I think our response is absolutely. I had noted in these areas because I want to be able to demonstrate that you are helping an organization grow beyond necessarily what they currently can provide, And a lot of that in the technical world sort of looks, and like kind of countable widgety things. But I think certainly when it comes to serving LGBTQ populations, we have many investments that are focused around that. And we might have providers that have staff or have boards or have leadership that are not familiar with that and might need that type of support. I think it's totally relevant. The only thing I want to really caveat there is that we are probably going to be interested in seeing some things around sort of the organizational maintenance of a nonprofit. So that might be really helpful too, just to be able to note those things. But I think this kind of is a great segue, so thank you for asking. I noted these areas on the left, but we also want to see in your applications your own personal experiences or flair or what it is that makes you about you as a consultant or an organization, what it is that you really could bring to the levy that would really help round out our TACB providers. So it's not just that you're all the same, you all have different backgrounds and experiences, and we want to hear about that too. So that's a great point, Toby. And I'm going to move on to the next slide just quickly, but I hear one last question here from Trang too that says, in this COVID environment, is access to technology a challenge for any of the nonprofit partners? And if so, do you have any thoughts on how they could engage with TACB consultants? It's a great question. So we are aware that for certainly in rural areas, internet connectivity and the ability to do things like a Zoom meeting are challenging. And we actually, when we envisioned this, we did not anticipate COVID. This was laid out a few years ago. So how they could engage would certainly be face-to-face if possible. And we'll actually clarify a little bit of that in the process stage here coming up in the next couple slides. But certainly when we're talking to a small organization, we're going to look at what it is they're going to need from a TACB partner. And is that something that's going to be more hands-on, or is something that is better done remote? And what is the preference they have? So there's certainly many cultural reasons why working over the internet is just not going to get you that same level of trust and rapport. And we're not going to put you in a place where you're having to work around some tech issue or you're going to have to engage with somebody in an unsafe way. We're definitely going to be very negotiable on that, and we're going to work with you to make sure that you feel supported and you're able to actually provide the level of service that these people need. So in firm response, it has been a challenge for some partners as far as how TA consultants could engage. Certainly when it's safe to do so, we could introduce the thought of getting back to more of those hands-on face-to-face interactions. But many of the partners have been joining us via phone calls at the very least and recognize that as a potential opportunity. But it's something that we've really struggled with. So I'd welcome your all's perspectives as well. And I think that that's something that we could get into again in the contracting phase of this. So thank you for asking that. And as a kind of a long-winded question, so I'll make sure and record that and write it down. Okay, so just to keep moving us forward here, let's get into the funding. So selected applicants will be reimbursed at a rate of $150 per hour of technical assistance services provided, TACB services provided. And again, to John's point, that can be a little flexible. That's not outlined here because I don't think it's relevant. We want to really get into the qualifications aspect. When it comes into compensation and the final details, really that's where I want to see you all making sure that you feel comfortable and that it's being accurately reflected in your contracts. Funded providers will be actually added to a roster of consultants to be utilized by King County. And then the ways in which they engage will be through King County. So our providers know all of our program staff really well. Our program staff might recommend they receive TACB consulting. That small organization would then talk to King County through it's basically like a little simple form where they fill out a request. And then we can talk to the consultants and we figure out who's going to be best to work with them, or we'll maybe offer a couple people to them. But that's the way the relationship will sort of be managed. And then again, that can be another checkpoint where we see this is the type of request that's being made. Here's the number of hours or type of like warm up I would need before I could engage in a relationship with this person. And we can talk about that at that point too, so you don't feel you're having to take on a lot of hours without being compensated appropriately for that. Okay. So that's the funding piece. I'm going to check the chat just here really quickly. I saw a couple more come through. Trang was saying, I was thinking of this from an equity standpoint, that some partners with the most need might have the most challenges even accessing technology. And I totally agree, Trang. It's definitely something that I just want to be transparent that is a challenge for me as somebody who's very tech forward and lives in a big city. It's very tough for me to understand what all they're looking for, what all they're needing. So the ways in which I think we're going to best address this is we have program staff who talk with these providers, and when we officially finalize the roster, I think the first step we're going to do is reach out to them and say, here is a current, suite of services we have funded. What would help you engage with this more? And that way it's not just simply on you as the consultant to figure that out, but it's on us as King County as well. So yeah, I appreciate that question. Just to push us a little bit, so we're going to get into the eligibility section here. So just to clarify who is actually eligible to be funded by this. You can see at the top here, it's open to nonprofits, community-based organizations, tribes, tribal organizations, public agencies, and we also call out private consultants with expertise in these areas. And really, you can apply that to any of the areas we call out in the levy or in the RFQ for funding, are encouraged to submit qualifications. So again, you do not need to be a formal nonprofit or a formal organization. If you are somebody who has experience and you've got expertise and you really feel like you understand some of the struggles small organizations could go through, I think you're well eligible to apply and be considered for funding. Depending on the expertise area that you indicate within your application, applicants can possess the relevant experience in a combination of the following. And again, this is sort of matching back to what we saw before with a little more detail here, but you can see there's a lot of flexibility. There's a lot of space for you to sort of bring your own perspective and experience in there, particularly when you're talking about coaching or advising, providing communications development, fundraising assistance, HR support. There's definitely a variety of skills buried within there that I don't want to pretend we have like one exact skill we're looking for, no more, no less. So certainly when you're submitting your qualifications, tease out any specifics or any particular like sub-detailed focus areas. That'd be helpful for us to see too. Okay, so just gonna slow down a little bit because I can talk very quickly. Keep those questions coming. Just to continue more on eligibility, this section talks about the most qualified applicants. So just to, I think, break it down. So eligibility, can you be considered? And then the most qualified, what will King County be looking for? Or what is King County hoping that they can have in their TACB consultants? And it's pretty light again. General public funding knowledge, knowledge of the levy strategy areas is always very helpful to know a little bit about the levies background. Being able to work or have worked with a diverse, wide range of cultures and communities. And diverse is a word as well that I utilize to say diversity of budgets, diversity of areas of service. So, if you've worked with people applying for funding for wastewater treatment systems, as well as a variety of other things, that is valuable for us to know. And I don't want you to feel like you have to self-select those experiences you've had out. Being able to communicate effectively in multiple languages. This one can be, I know, intimidating for some people, and I just want to say it's not our expectation that you as one person can speak all the languages of King County, but rather if you are going to work with a team, that you note who's on that team and who could be working with a TAC or with a small provider, and then note the languages that they might speak or they feel comfortable speaking. Our goal is to provide a suite of consultants that could maybe cover multiple languages, so it's not all on one individual. Speaking about equity and social justice as well, we'd like to understand that applicants have at least an understanding of systemic and structural inequality. We've talked about it a little bit already. When you talk about the urban-rural divide, that's one form of inequality, but as well as racism and prejudice and other forms of these institutional discriminations that the county or other public entities could easily oversee and not support a small organization that is facing some inequity, as well as coaching and or TA to organizations, particularly smaller community-based agencies. So again, that can happen on a one-to-one level if you as a private consultant have done this, or if your organization has done this and you'd like to highlight that as well. That's what we're looking for and what we would consider to be the most qualified. Some of the contract components. So again, this isn't the entirety of contracting. This is just to highlight some of the little pieces you might be expected in your contract. So again, you'll be one member of a roster of TACB consultants. That's why we're looking for a range of services. So you don't have to provide all of those things. You could be a strong contributor in one subsect of those required areas. And you'll be supporting small funded organizations. The process will begin with that contractor making a request, usually to their program staff, or sometimes it'll happen from the program staff recommending it to the contractor. They'll fill out a very simple survey that just basically says, what area of support are you looking for? Maybe a short, paragraph or a phone call that accompanies that. And then King County, myself and my colleagues will be working with you all to figure out who we feel is best equipped to support them. We might also offer a range of potential consultants to that provider and allow them to select. Perhaps they could choose somebody based off of cultural experiences, language barriers, location. There's a whole variety of factors there. But that process hasn't been locked down yet exactly. So I don't want to pretend to say that I know the exact form, I know the exact time request turnaround, but basically you'll be communicating with King County and we'll help filter through those requests. So it's not just going to be sending you and having you be inundated with a lot of requests. Okay, let me see here. And I see here Trang had a question as well on the last slide about what it is we're looking for most qualified applicants. In these bullets and in the RFQ itself, I believe this language was pulled directly from the RFQ. We're looking for experience in the following areas, and it could be a combination of those. It doesn't have to be all of those, but the most qualified applicants will have a strong set of these in their application. So it's all those bulleted points right there. Carrie asked a very good question. How will you determine who is an appropriate consultant? It really will be based, I haven't exactly nailed down the rubric, but what we'll look at is what are they requesting? What is some areas that they've highlighted for immediate need? And as well, what does the program staff see? So if, for example, they have noted they have a real strong problem in their accounting systems, we'll probably try and connect them to a consultant or consultants who have accounting experience. If they are saying, as I think Toby mentioned earlier, we are working with LGBTQ populations, we'd like to have a training or we'd like to have some sort of staff development to work better with those populations, we might try and connect them with a consultant that has strong experience in there. And the only areas I can see where there's maybe some flexibilities, I could totally foresee that we have a strong roster with areas of overlap. And that's where I could envision a world where we, say, provider, here are 4 of our TACB consultants that have experience in human resources, which you noted. Here's a little profile on them, and we encourage you to let us know which one you'd like to speak with. That would probably be a way we would do it. It's very similar to how we currently do TA, where folks see a list of TA providers, apply for their application assistance from there. But it is a challenge to figure out, and that's why I wasn't exactly sure what the best methodology will be, and we'll iron that out in the contracting as well, and allow you some time to respond and read through it in the contracting to see if it makes sense for you. So Uma mentions, is there a way to know in advance about the commitment? How much advance notice will we get? Totally, and I think that this is where it becomes that sort of communication and relationship piece between you and me as the contract holder. We will communicate with you when we see a request has come in, and it will not be an expectation that you jump in a small amount of time. For example, I could see we have a request come in for HR support. We contact the HR qualified TACB consultants, and maybe you say, I have availability or I don't, and then we could work with other consultants to see who has that availability. We can iron that, we can lay that out specifically in the contract if you desire, as far as the turnaround time, but we might request that you respond to an email within 72 hours or something like that. But I don't see a world where we'd say, okay, this person needs help right now. Can you get to them in the next 24 hours? I think we are going to ask for this type of support to be long-term and developing the organization as a whole, rather than those quick, immediate responses to emergencies. So I hope that helps. But we haven't ironed that out. That will be present in the contract that you'd sign if selected. Carrie also asked, will the levy cover only project-based work or ongoing subscription-based services as well? That's a really good question, Carrie. Let me pause on that one, because that's something that we had discussed, and actually I don't think I said in this RFQ. So I'm going to talk to my supervisor about whether or not that's something we allow. But I believe we have considered it before, and I think it depends on what type of service it is. I think as long as we support it, as long as we agree to it whenever we're sort of doing that handoff between the service provider and the consultant, I don't see an issue with it. It would just have to be something that we agree to ahead of time. But for my final answer, I'm going to make sure and talk to my supervisor and verify that that's actually possible. As of right now, we envisioned it as project-based heavily, with perhaps some exceptions that we engage with. Certainly, we've considered King County's paying for a service, a subscription service, and then doling it out to different providers, but that hasn't been ironed out. So you'll see a formal answer in my FAQ document. So apologies for not knowing that one off the top of my head. Timeline. So what all is going to be asked of you all for this RFQ? It has been released on July 29th. You are now here at the Bidders Conference. Thanks for joining. The final day to submit questions to me is August 21st. This just is to make sure that I can respond and turn things around quickly. It's possible that I could be responsive to a question, but I really want to insist on the 21st as the hard deadline. I'll make sure and upload the FAQ document soon thereafter with an updated information, and that way all applicants get a chance to review that before they apply on August 28th. That's when it is due. Do note, Zoom Grants is not perfect. Please start your application quickly and submit it. I would recommend at least a couple days in advance. We also are going to review responses and rate them in early September with interviews with qualified applicants shortly following this. You can anticipate having an interview between the 2nd and 3rd week of September, and it will be 30 minutes. I'll make sure and schedule it with you and make a request of your time. 30 minutes, and it's really just a chance to make sure and learn a little bit more about you. Perhaps there's something in the application we want to learn more about. We're going to probably ask about your approach to service, your values. I've laid out a few of these pieces in the RFQ you can read more about, but the interview will not be in as much like a job interview. It'll probably be a little bit more about who you are as an applicant and a consultant. Notification of the awards will happen in October, and then the contract will start in October as well. We have that really crunched together just so that we can hopefully move through it quickly. These contracts are a little bit easier for King County to write than others, so I hope that we could get it in a place where you would feel comfortable and be ready to sign on in October, and then we could add you to our roster. Okay, so I'll pause there for just a moment because I did see a couple questions come in. Okay, so Carrie said, I just want to point out that subscription services can build immediate capacity for small orgs. Definitely agree, Carrie. I think that's something that we're trying to figure out. We have multiple, like I said, the levy has that 1% cutout for TACB, and this doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to consume all of it with this RFQ. I think the county is also considering paying for subscription services and then having people be able to access it whenever they want. Sort of like we would pay for the Netflix account and then give out accounts to people who need it. That's one consideration. And this RFQ just hasn't answered that question specifically, so I'm going to make sure and verify that that's possible. I don't doubt the value of it. I just want to make sure that it's possible with the funding they've outlined in this. So thanks for highlighting that, Carrie. Trang also asked, is the desire to provide the needed services directly, for example, facilitate strategic planning, or to build the organization's capacity to do so in-house in the future? So here's how to conduct strategic planning on your own, etc. Or will this depend on the organization's needs? Trang, thanks for the question. It's a little bit of both. I think for strategic planning, I don't want to tell you how to do it. I'd like to hear perhaps your experience providing strategic planning and what it is you found that has worked well, and then allow for probably a combination of the two. It's really going to rely on what does the service provider requesting the support really looking for. It could be that they just got this big contract from King County and they need to plan out how it is they're going to do it in the next 4 years, and they need some support right now. It could also be that they're looking to grow and they would like a strategic plan well beyond just 1 or 2 fund source, and they want to grow their organization, and maybe we have a couple workshops or just want to learn how to do it themselves, and that's totally feasible as well. So I would say if you are looking at something like strategic planning or any of these areas, highlighting how it is that you have done it before and what you feel you're qualified for. So if you're a really good trainer on strategic planning, that's good to highlight. If you're really good at actually conducting it yourself and having the applicant be there present and participating, that's great to highlight too. I don't want to tell you what we expect, because I think that would limit what would get applied for, if that makes any sense. And trying to say basically, I'm not the expert in this. I want you to highlight what it is you feel is going to be useful, what it is you feel is you're really skilled at, and then yeah, we can utilize that as part of our like bank of skills we offer. So I hope that helps. Victoria asked, on a previous RFP, you have expressed that the organization or consultant didn't need to reach all populations served by the levy, yet the county decided not to make any awards because the application submitted in response to this RFP did not represent all eligible populations. Would this be the case for the RFQ as well? Would the consultant be expected to have expertise with all levy populations? So let me just clarify on this, Victoria. So I appreciate you raising this. The communication may have been misinterpreted there. We had an RFP open that had pockets of funding for every single, for all three populations, so vets, seniors, and vulnerable populations. And the RFP didn't get applicants in applying for all three, for each of the thirds. So that's not to say one applicant has to apply for all three pockets of funding, but we had, I believe, over a dozen applicants, and there were certain entire portions of funding that did not get applied for. So it was our decision to postpone that RFP and re-release it, and with the hopes that we could gather more community interest in not just 1 or 2/3 of the levy, but all 3/3, and then award from there. So for TA consultants, you are not expected to have expertise in all the population areas. It'd be great to have expertise in 1 or 2, but certainly it's not our expectation that you'd be an expert in all 3. Having experience and being able to highlight that you've had experience in any of the 3/3 is going to be useful and would be really helpful for us. But again, you'll be working with service providers, not with those direct clients themselves. So thanks for that question. Okay, so can I keep asking them because those are very detailed questions you all have had. I wouldn't expect anything less. But applying, just want to highlight August 28th is the date. Make sure and have it in. And the completed submittals will look like this. And these are all going to be tabbed out, and I'll show you very briefly the Zoom Grants RFQ. So response to summary questions, response to the narrative questions, and a professional references sheet. I did not upload a template, and you will not be graded on the template of the references sheet, just so long as it has the information requested is sufficient. So don't stress too much about that. And on the references sheet, just have at least 2 references with contact information, and I believe I noted in the RFQ a few other questions we'd like to have about the references. So what are you going to be graded on? The rating criteria is as follows, with the majority of the points being awarded to your qualifications. So do you have experience providing the services or working with agencies? Do you have professional values and approach that align with a good TACB consultant for our small organizations? Yeah, 20 points for your references. And again, that's making sure you have them there and that they have the contact information we've requested. We're not going to be grading the quality of a reference necessarily, but we'll be certainly talking to them and making sure that the contact information you provided is accurate. Equity and social justice, being able to speak to your values and commitment and awareness to equity and social justice values and that they align with King County. And then as well, interviews at the very end. So that'll be an additional 10 just to make sure that we're aware of the applicant in their entirety or that we didn't misinterpret anything from their application. So 110 points total. You can see that in greater detail as well in the RFQ. So Zoom Grants. So let's just quickly open up Zoom Grants. We're in the back 9 here of our presentation, so I appreciate you holding on for now. Let me see here. So I'm going to share my screen here. Okay. I just shared a new screen. Hopefully it all is popping up for you. Do we have to play golf? I wish. Actually, I'm not a very good golfer, so I don't know why I use that analogy. So you may have seen this email got sent out. You don't have to have seen it, but this is just where it may have been easily accessible. And it is available on Zoom Grants. Here's what Zoom Grants looks like. If you haven't used it before, you can create a new account in the upper right-hand corner. It has these blue tabs across the top, which will basically hide or show this information down below. So if I hide the description, I can show it again. And all of this stuff should be very reflective of what is also currently in the RFQ. So you can always just rely on that for information. But as you go down here, the piece I want to really highlight is the library. This area here, all of these are attachments. You click on one of these and they would download the document. I'll also upload the YouTube video for this presentation, which is super riveting, I'm sure, for you all. And then the FAQ documents will be regularly updated here as well. So always check out the library tab. You'll also get announcements whenever I announce like this update has been made. There's a new library document. I'll make those as well, and they should appear whenever you've created your application profile. Answering the questions are all available here in these blue tabs. So you've got summary questions 1 and 2. Your narrative questions, which do have character limits, so be mindful of that. The organizational equity chart as well is built into Zoom Grants. And the required documents where you upload your professional references sheet is here as well. This will not let you submit an application without this being uploaded. On as well, when it comes to answering the questions, we have heard that it's helpful. I think it's helpful to download the RFQ up here, download the narrative questions, and actually type out your responses. Because as you go through Zoom Grants, right, you post this information in here. When you type it into Word, you'll already know how many characters you've used and whether or not you're going to hit the cap. But Zoom Grants will auto-save your answers as you click through. So you've created your profile, you start answering these questions. It'll auto-save as you click in and out of each of these boxes. But every now and again, you'll see this flashing green loading symbol in the center of your screen. And that means that it's had some sort of a glitch or an error. So you want to make sure that you have your answers recorded somewhere and you refresh the page. Then it'll be really easy to go back in and paste those answers again. Usually when you get that loading error, it's just the last question you answered hasn't been saved correctly. So it's not like you got to go and dump them all back in again. But that's just something to be mindful of. And that's why doing this at like 11:58 p.m. on the day it's due is really challenging. So be mindful of that. Okay, so I think that's pretty much it. I'm gonna go back. Any questions on this interface right now? Actually, I'll just pause. Any questions on Zoom Grants, technical stuff, approachable stuff, whatever you have?
Actually, I have a question about Zoom Grants.
Yeah, please go ahead, John.
So it seems you would prefer us not to upload a Word doc that meets the character count. You prefer that we copy and paste it into Zoom Grants.
Yes, that's correct. We'll use this as our rating platform as well. So that's why it's very helpful for us to have it right there.
Okay. And so as I recall, there's no formatting tricks in Zoom Grants. So we can't use bold or italics.
That's right. Nothing fun or fancy there. Just slap it all in there and we'll take it as it is.
Okay. So so can you take a couple other questions?
Sure. Go ahead, John.
So I currently work as a consultant to a recipient of the VSHSL. So it's King County, it's a Central Area Senior Center, and we have the African Diaspora Senior Hub, and we just got awarded one of the evidence-based health promotion grants.
Yes.
So, first question is, would it be considered a conflict of interest for me to pitch into this and then get selected to work with other Levy recipients?
Not at all. I think having experience with a current contractor and knowing at least what the county has done in other contracts is totally useful and valuable stuff. If we proceed to any issue, again, like this is going to be really controlled as far as the interaction between you and any of the service providers. So we would just talk with you about that if we had any concerns, but no, I see no problem with that.
So going the other way, the services I'm providing are within the list that you are now offering sponsorship of.
Yes.
So could they, if I'm landed as a qualified consultant, could they request just me and just for some of the services I'm giving them so that we can relieve that pressure on their budget? because frankly, with the COVID crises and they have been able to collect participant fees and some other rental income, they are really pinched. And I've been sort of pre-warned. It's like be super alert and careful with your hours.
Yes. Yeah, so it's a great question. So I mean, I think just to speak to what the intent of this RFQ is we don't want to be trying to just have people like have their favorite consultant come in and just work with them exclusively. So you would have to be, the expectation would also be that you would be responsive to others that might be interested in working with you as well. Particularly if you offer like a really unique services that Centralia was getting, maybe if there's other senior serving orgs that would really like to have your experience, I would expect as well that you'd be responsive and would help those organizations too.
Sure.
But I think that you're speaking to something that I think is exactly the purpose of this RFQ. We don't want those folks to be having to take precious money out of their program budget and dedicate it to having those other critical organizational infrastructural pieces. This is exactly what we're designing this for, is so that they could ping us and say, hey, we see like John is one of your providers or one of your TA people. We've had great experiences with John. We'd like some support in, for our accounting system or whatever it may be. And somebody who works with us, who has had good experiences with us, would be our preferred person. I don't see a reason why I would be like, no, I'm not going to let you work with this person anymore.
Okay.
I think that's spot on what we're trying to sort of help cover organizations not expend on their own budgets.
Okay. And then a third question, and then I'll give back my time. How helpful would it be to call out possibly other types of training that small organizations might appreciate, but maybe not necessarily listed in your qualifications and things? And I'm particularly thinking about when you're working with clients or working with volunteers or anybody just working with each other, motivational interviewing skills are just really super helpful. And it's one of my skill sets. I'll probably mention it, but I don't know if that's something I would be, people would say like, well, that's kind of interesting, but it's missing what this grant's about.
I think that that's still in line with what we're looking for, and I think it's a good example of maybe I didn't write it down, but I think it fits in a few areas that would develop, especially if especially if it's something that we're hearing is needed or something that you can connect in your application is a need of organizations and how it helps them either to develop their fundraising or develop their staff retention, which we know is a big problem, or in applying to other grants or whatever it may be. I think it's totally relevant, and I think it's something that particularly if you said, here's a training that this person came to me with XYZ request, and here's a training I'd like to support with them with. I don't foresee King County having an issue with that. It just shows that you have this particular experience and that you'd like to bring to those providers. So yeah, I think that's relevant, and I think it's something that we would support you on if you were funded through this RFQ. And that goes for everybody else too. If you have particular trainings or qualifications that you think maybe I didn't ask about, that might just be that I just didn't know about it, or I didn't want to limit you all and say you have to have had trainings in order to be qualified for something. Things that you feel make you special or help you pop to another organization is absolutely worth referencing.
You dropped off. We can't hear you.
I just got a Zoom call. I just got a Skype call, so I think that may have muted me a little bit there.
All right.
About that.
So you're back.
But yeah, I'd say reference it, use it in your application, and it's something that we would support as well. Okay. So yeah, hopefully my sound is back. Okay, thank you, John. I appreciate that. Carrie also asked, is there a desire on the part of the county to provide some services at a rate of less than $150 per hour? In many cases, this value is much higher than what might be charged for typical ongoing services. Please advise. We've chosen 150 to try and demonstrate that this is an investment of ours that we want to make sure we're dedicating proper resources to, that we are getting qualified and skilled people in here to provide these resources, and that our TA consultants are not struggling to make their ends meet while working for King County. It's a value we've set, and it's a rate that we have heard was demonstrated value and investment in our providers, and that's why we've chosen that rate. We don't have any particular interest that I've noted about different rates, but like I've said before, the TACB funding that we get this from is fairly broad, and this RFQ is at this rate, but there might be other TACB funded services or opportunities later on that don't have the same rate. So that's kind of a non-answer, but we just basically stuck with that, and that's why we're here. I also see Uma has said, I have a similar question about rates, but actually wondering if there is room to go higher on the rates. Oh, thank you, Uma. Yeah, unfortunately, we have locked the rate. We've capped the rate at 150 for this RFQ, but I think there may be opportunities if we are seeing there's a need to have a more affordable service. Again, we just did not want to put TA providers in a place where they could be working for King County, be doing great King County work, and wouldn't be fairly compensated or professionally compensated for their time. And that's kind of the purpose here, because we know there's many hidden expenses beyond the service. There's the prep time, there's other pieces, there's the technology you're using, and we know that you don't necessarily get paid for all those while being a consultant. Lizzie, I see you've also raised your hand. I'm going to unmute you as well. Go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you, Adam. So I want a little bit more explanation as far as what this $150 per hour rate, how is that applied in the RFQ? Is it part of your budget? Is it for your consulting fee? I'm not really clear on the $150 per hour TACB rate, how that's applicable in the RFQ.
So it's a good question, Lizzie. I appreciate you asking it. Really what this is just so that you can know what we are willing to pay, and then as you go through, and I'll show you the way it currently works. Like with application assistance, we have providers who support people filling out applications. At the end of every month, they report how many hours they spent working with each provider. Then they include that in an invoice form. I go through and I double check to make sure that the numbers are aligned and that they are working with an applicant that I know did send in an application on an RFP or RFQ that I know is available during that time. And then if all that lines up and I don't have any other questions, they would get supported with that invoice. So for the purposes of this one, you don't need to submit any documentation or budget issues or budget related materials for this RFQ. You just need to submit your qualifications and responses to the prompts, and be comfortable with that rate being your rate of compensation if you were selected. So I hope that helps.
Okay, thank you.
No, my pleasure. John, I see you raised your hand too. Do you have a question as well? I'll unmute you. Oh wait, there, I asked you to be unmuted. There you go.
How's that?
There you go, perfect.
Cool. You didn't list advocacy as any part of the TA, and let me start to give a background to that. Nonprofits have to survive, and very often part of that is they need a policy change or a policy clarification or policy sustaining, and there's some threat that something that supports them is about to be voted on or reversed or changed. And so they need to be in the public sphere. And I'm particularly thinking government, King County government perhaps, could be local council. It could be just a neighborhood group that has a not in my backyard type of question. So what room for capacity to do that? I have a lot of skill in that, a huge background. So is there legitimate that I include that so that possibly VSHSL grantees at least can see that resources there, and that you've considered whether you would support their being supported around it?
Yeah, this is a good question too, because it speaks to a couple things that we had talked about during the drafting process. So just so you know too, I'm not a perfect drafter or writer of RFQs. It's very likely that I've missed something. With advocacy, I can say I know that that term in particular can be eye-catching to elected officials who might be looking over these RFQs and be curious about what King County is paying independent contractors to do. So I think that that term has been left out of this RFQ for that reason. And because really when you read in the implementation plan, it does describe what TACB really is, and I really have to kind of stick to that, and it does really speak to that sort of those technical skills as well as some of these areas of organizational development. But there's certainly, I think, some room when you're working with an organization as they try to realize their mission, if they're trying to do some strategic planning, if they are needing to do some governance or some leadership development or trainings, where I could see some sort of public advocacy generally could be supported. I do not see a world in which we would support any advocacy of a particular initiative or ballot initiative or anything that's going to be voted on by the public. That's definitely something I can obviously call out. That's not what you're asking about, but I know that's something that I can just say as a King County official stance. So for advocacy generally, I think it's something that could be included. I encourage you all, if you do have advocacy background experience, please include it. We have staff that work on these RFQs that were advocates at one point or another in their lives, and we're not opposed to that being a skill set, I assure you. It's just that I think when we start to talk about it in that way, it could be something that's just a little hair raising for certain people who are 4 or 5 floors above me in the chain.
So Adam, this is good answer. So I'm feeling though, with my mission, I need to communicate that mission, and I have some public relations or maybe public education piece that goes with that. You know, maybe I have a survey and I'm a food bank, and it appears that you know, gee, my own district representative isn't aware of it. So as part of what I'm doing just outside with everybody else, I'm sending a note to my district representative, hey, we are here, and this is how many people we're serving, and we just want to update you on what our that we haven't gone anywhere because of COVID. We actually are working harder. So so that's not really so much advocacy, but it seems to be part of every organization has a need to keep themselves somewhat in the public attention, including representatives, because they're from the public, but they have a little bit more power. Yeah. So I think your answer was really spot on. Okay. Yeah, and there is a piece. Always there's a piece for self-protection. You know, particularly when something specifically about your situation shows up. That I think all levels of government, they don't really. People in them who are in an office don't really like it, but they appreciated that. What else are you going to do? You just let them steamroll, or let somebody with a lot more money steamroll over you and not have any word or any comment. So, all right, appreciate it.
Yeah, it's a good point. And I'm so now I'm showing just so everyone who's still watching the screen, I'm showing the scope of work section for this RFQ. And I think when you read through, for example, the provision of capacity building and what it really refers to, the process of providing that support designed to develop and strengthen skills and competencies and enhance an organization's ability to achieve its mission and sustain itself over time. I'm not saying anything specifically really in there. I'm not highlighting a particular skill, but I think if you in your all's experience have found that public relations, communications, fundraising development all have an element of a public advocacy, lens, that's okay, and that is in line with what we're trying to do. And I think to your point too, John, the only thing we're not going to do is say, yeah, go out and tell them to vote no on Amendment 2 or whatever it may be. And certainly, I think mentioning that in your applications, in your qualifications, is going to be great. We'll be able to get a sense of, how could you support an organization beyond just their simple fundraising request? Maybe you could introduce that they need to be doing other public advocacy or other advocacy-related elements to their fundraising or their leadership development or whatever it may be.
That's great, yeah, because I've done trainings for nonprofits on the distinction between what's permitted 501c3, 501c4, this general self-defense, and at all the different layers. So the state, the county, city.
Yeah. So and I just want to encourage you, if when you look at the scope, when you all look at the scope of work, if you read these 2 provisions here around what is TA and what is CB, if you feel that your skills can fit in there and you can advocate for them in your application, or you want to talk about it a little bit, I'd say go for it. And I think that we've tried to write some areas really vague so that you can fill that space. I see as well, Uma, you have your hand raised, so I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself and yeah, go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, I was wondering if there was a limit to the hours. So like when I think about certain projects like strategic planning or fundraising coaching or things like that, that could be like anywhere from 10 to like 40 hours, you know, just kind of depending on the organization. I feel like it's really varied for me on
Yes.
different clients. And so I was wondering if there was a cap on that per project that I don't know about.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I didn't include a cap here, and I have not written one in a previous TACB contract, so I don't foresee one. I think that what would probably happen would be that you all would get into a discussion with your, let's say, Uma, this person needs something that I think you're totally aligned with, or you've offered, you have whatever skill this person's looking for, and they really like you, so they'd like to work with you. I could see there being a world in which you have to either let us know what you anticipate it'll take or what you see it might take, and then just communicate with us about it. So if it's going to be something that's like that, gosh, they asked for this one thing, but they really are actually going to need like 40 hours of support over the next month. I don't see any problem why we would reject that unless there's some clear and obvious problem with that. But no, there's no particular cap, there's no particular requirement. And I just say that I think, when you work with your contractor, if you get under contract with King County, you just have a relationship with that contractor and be able to, anticipate what they might question. So if you like have filled out no hours with this contractor and then all of a sudden you spiked up to 40 in the span of 2 weeks, just being able to anticipate that we might ask about that and need some clarification around that. And then, yeah, I mean, I'd say as long as you're documenting your time and that's how long it's taking and the contractor, that's what they're looking for, I think that's okay. We're not going to tell you it has to be 16 hours or less and no more,
Cool. Thank you.
You're very welcome, Uma. Thank you for the question. Okay, team, we're pushing up against our time. We still have 13 minutes left, so I'm not going to mandate you stick around, but I'm just going to finish my PowerPoint here with my final slide, which is just to say, contact me. You've asked a lot of great questions that I'm recording, and I'll be sure to transcribe these into a FAQ document and upload shortly. But if there is anything else in this RFQ that you're like, wait a minute, you said one thing in this bidders conference, and now you're saying another thing in your RFQ, that's totally possible. Please just let me know, and I will make sure and write either a correction or I will answer it in an FAQ what that distinction may be. The other thing just to note is this website here, if if this is the first time you've interacted with any other levy funding, but you want to see more opportunities, we are on the tail end of procurement, but we do have, I think, about 8 or 9 still to come out. So you could certainly use that website there, kingcounty.gov/VSHSL-funding to see all of our particular procurements. We also have our current awards database up there, so if you want to see who all's been awarded, you could go up there as well. And let's see, is there anything else I need? I think that's it for me. So I'll pause and allow for more questions. If there are no more questions, you all can be on your merry way and expect to get an update from me.
That was really informative, Adam. Thank you so much.
Oh my gosh, I'm glad to hear that,
thank
team. Sometimes those can feel like I'm just babbling, so I appreciate your patience and your use of chat and questions. Is very helpful. Just again, if I did not have your email, please drop it in the chat box and I'll make sure and add you to the recipients of this email, or start your application on Zoom Grants and you'll get notified every time I make a change on there as well. Thank you, Carrie. Yes. Okay, team, any other questions, things I can clarify, things that didn't make sense? Thank you, Trang. Appreciate that. John, I see you're talking, but you might be talking to somebody else. So.
Here
Yep,
you
there
go.
you
I'm
are.
talking to you.
Hey.
I was on the chat. I had to click on the regular piece. I'm not sure you can save your chat.
Yes, I'm just taking down notes. I'm not gonna save the chat, but I will just take down my notes here from it. So.
Because I've been on King County calls and we've had to do screenshots. We wanted to save anything.
I've got a OneNote here that I've just kind of been dropping some of the chat into as well. So.
All right, good. So you're aware of that.
Yeah, I do appreciate that. I could have very easily forgotten about that. Thank you, Uma. Thank you, Lizzie.
Okay, so I'm out of here.
All right.
Thanks, Adam.
My pleasure. Thank you, Deepika. All right, team. Well, I will end the recording there, and this will be uploaded into Zoom Grants and our Levy funding page. Thanks so much for joining.